Imagine yourself staring out at the Milky Way galaxy on a clear summer night. You're in absolute awe at what you see. Millions and millions of stars in the sky. Amazing, isn't it? What if I told you there are enough viruses on Earth to assign one to each star 100 million times over? Now that's a lot of viruses. Most viruses are actually harmless to us, which is awesome because viruses make their way into our body all the time as we breathe, eat, drink, and do pretty much anything. There are some, however, that can make us extremely sick. So, why do some give us a bad fever while others don't? Who's more likely to catch a virus, and how can we prevent ourselves from being victim to its awful symptoms? And while we're at it, what even is a virus? All these questions and much more will be answered on our weekly Go Viral video presentation series. Today, we're happy to present the first episode of this series, Introduction and Origin Stories. Today's episode will give a brief rundown of what this whole series is about and give some background on viruses, in particular, two very well known ones. Perhaps you can already guess one of the two viruses we'll be talking about. Before we get into talking about all things viruses, I want to introduce myself and our research lab. My name's Madhab Gill, and I'm a fourth year undergraduate student studying biology at the University of British Columbia. I've been a part of Dr. Hélène Cote's lab for the past 2 years, and here's a picture of most of our lab members, with some who are missing, including myself actually, but I've managed to crop myself in there. So, our research is focused on HIV, which is a virus you may have heard about. Mainly, we study how HIV and its medication affect aging. I just want to quickly touch on what this whole video and series is for. Why are we doing this? With the help of the Center for Blood Research at UBC, we want to communicate about our research in an easy to understand way. Right now, as you know, the world is gripped by the COVID-19 pandemic, and because it's caused by a virus, we want to relate the similarities and differences it shares with HIV. We believe that talking about these viruses together is an effective way to relate what's going on in the world right now to what we do on a daily basis in our research lab at UBC. Beyond this, we hope to equip you with some useful information on both of these viruses and their broader social and health related consequences. This is the first of 5 episodes in our series. We'll be discussing the structure of viruses, how they try to beat our immune system, the current testing strategies, as well as effective steps we can take to prevent catching them or passing them on to others. In this episode, we'll ask what a virus is, then talk about the origins of HIV and COVID 19, and who has been particularly affected by these viruses. Okay, let's get to the actual content. What is a virus? Viruses are small particles that come in all shapes and sizes. Well, not really all sizes because they're extremely small. In fact, they're so small that if a cell was the size of the dome on Science World, a virus would be roughly the size of a soccer ball. So that's really small. And the only goal for a virus is to make more copies of itself. Viruses come with their own genetic code. We can think of this code kind of like an instruction manual that tells the virus how to survive and make more of itself. Viruses aren't living things like the cells that make up our body, or at least not exactly. In order for a virus to survive and replicate or make more copies of itself, it needs a host. The virus has to enter a cell and, in a way, hijack it. The virus, like we said before, are really small. So the red circle here represents one of these viruses seen on the left. Here, the virus goes inside the cell to make more copies of itself. In reality, there would be millions and millions of copies that are made. And you can see the cell isn't really happy about having so many viruses floating around inside of it. But why does a virus hijack cells? Well, each cell in our body functions like a little factory with many different machines that serve different functions. You might have even heard about some of these machines, like the mitochondria, the good old powerhouse of the cell. In addition to these machines, each of our cells has DNA, which is a complex molecule that contains all the information needed to build and run the cell. The DNA is like our own instruction manual, and our cells have the machinery and equipment needed to read it. But viruses need our cells' machines to read their instruction manuals. So once the virus enters your cell, it hijacks the machinery to read its genetic code, so it can make millions of copies of itself. Then, the copies are released to infect other nearby cells and make even more copies. As more and more cells get infected, our body can get overwhelmed and tries to fight off the virus, giving us this kind of sick feeling. A common cold, for example, is caused by a virus. The same basic process applies to viruses like HIV and COVID 19. But where do these viruses come from, and how do they get to us? Coronavirus seems to have almost appeared out of nowhere, shutting everything down, stopping people from working, and closing our schools. And obviously, we're living through that right now. New information is coming out every day, and things could turn out to be different in the end, but as of right now, this is how it seemed to have started. In December of 2019, in Wuhan, China, multiple people started feeling unwell from a mysterious sickness that was quickly identified to be caused by a new coronavirus, which they called SARS-CoV 2. The disease caused by the SARS-CoV 2 virus was named COVID 19. It's a member of a family called coronaviruses, and scientists believe that it actually came from bats. From bats, it's believed to have been passed on to humans from another animal, such as a pangolin, which is this armadillo like creature, or a snake. Many believe that the place where the virus jumped from an animal to a human was in a live animal market in Wuhan, where animals interact closely with one another and with humans. This made it easier for the virus to jump from species to species. A virus that jumps from animals to humans is called zoonotic. Once humans started getting the virus, it quickly started spreading all across China. By the time China went into quarantine and imposed a nationwide lockdown to slow down the spread of the virus, it was too late. People had already been traveling outside of China. And this brought the virus to other countries. And so it quickly started spreading all over the world. And on March 12th, the outbreak was considered global and officially labeled as a pandemic by the World Health Organization. The first case in British Columbia was confirmed on January 28th. Soon after, steps were taken here as well to create measures which would lower the amount of people who got infected, such as introducing social distancing. As was mentioned earlier, scientists believe the current pandemic started because the virus jumped from a bat to another animal, and then to a human. This wouldn't be the first time that a virus transferred from an animal to humans and has led to a pandemic. HIV is another example of this. So, HIV stands for the human immunodeficiency virus. We'll go into more detail on what that name exactly means in future episodes. HIV is the result of cross-species transmission of a virus that naturally infects African simian primates, such as macaques or chimpanzees. The virus is called SIV, which means simian immunodeficiency virus. In these animals, the virus does not seem to cause harm, but the transfer of the virus from a chimpanzee to a human is what scientists believe gave rise to the human version of this virus. It's still unclear how exactly this virus was transmitted from primates to humans. Some think that it was from hunting or being bitten by one of these primates who had SIV. Viruses actually have an incredible ability to mutate and change over time. So it's believed that once the SIV entered humans, it changed and evolved into HIV over time, leading to the HIV/AIDS epidemic that began in 1981. Now we'll talk about the epidemiology of both COVID 19 and HIV. This is another word you may have heard a lot these days in regards to COVID 19. Epidemiology looks at the number and the different ways in which people are affected by a disease or disorder. Epidemiologists, those who study the spread of diseases, are concerned with how society is impacted by a health crisis like COVID 19 and HIV. Knowing this information is really important. Learning about how something like COVID 19 spreads, how many people can contract it, and who specifically is at a higher risk of becoming infected is extremely important in taking the right steps to lessen its harmful effects. This graph on the left shows the total number of people living with HIV worldwide between 1990 and 2017. Currently, it's estimated that close to 39 million people are living with HIV. Since the beginning of the epidemic, there have been a total of 72 million people who have contracted HIV and 33 million people who have died from it. The graph on the right shows the number of new cases each year since 1990. We can see that although the number of people living with HIV has increased over time, we have not only flattened the curve for HIV, but now the number of new cases has been decreasing steadily since the late 1990s and early 2000s. This is all thanks to medication that's come out over time to treat HIV, along with a huge education effort about how to be safe from HIV and how we can prevent transmission of this virus. This graph shows the number of growing confirmed COVID 19 cases worldwide since December 2019. At the time of this video, there have been approximately 4.4 million confirmed cases with 302,000 deaths. That's a huge spike in so little time, but we're starting to slow the rate of new cases. The bottom table shows the number of HIV and COVID 19 cases in BC. HIV cases are shown since 1985. At the time of this video, there have been 2,392 confirmed cases for COVID 19 with 135 deaths. Since 1985 to 2018, BC has seen approximately 16,000 cases of HIV with around 4,700 deaths. Here, we can see the total number of COVID 19 cases compared to the current number of people living with HIV. While there are many more people living with HIV compared to COVID 19, what's impressive and also scary with COVID 19 is how fast it spread to so many people. When comparing these numbers, it's important to note that HIV has been around for a much longer time than COVID 19, and that HIV stays with you permanently, whereas COVID 19 comes and goes. We'll talk more about this in our future videos. As mentioned previously, we're at different stages for both of these viruses in terms of the people who get infected and the exact rate at which all of this is happening. One thing that's really important to mention when discussing all of this is that pandemics almost rarely affect all people in the exact same way. Okay? So, for example, the Black Death in the 14th century reduced the global population by a third, and most of the people that died were amongst the poorest of populations. Recently in the news, you may have heard that COVID 19 has hit certain communities or people of certain racial backgrounds particularly hard. We've also heard that men have been more impacted by this virus compared to women in many places. So, how likely you are of catching a virus will change dramatically depending on who you are and where you are, your behavior and habits, the ways you're exposed, how well you're protected, and many other factors. So, while your age, sex, or ethnicity can contribute to your risk of catching a certain disease, social and environmental factors also play a role. For example, poorer populations may not have access to proper health care, medications to treat HIV, or enough protective equipment like masks to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Like we mentioned previously, education and awareness also play a huge role in helping to reduce transmission. In our research with HIV and aging, we look at some of these factors like age, sex, ethnicity, income, and even things like smoking and drug use. Knowing about this is important as it helps to understand why and how certain groups of people are affected by a virus like HIV. Then, once we better understand the short and long term effects of the virus, we can hopefully start taking the steps to help all groups of people affected. And that brings us to the end of this first episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we'll be talking about the structure of viruses and give some more detail on how they work. I want to leave you with a question on viruses for next episode, though. So remember, we talked about how viruses have their own instruction manual or genetic code. In humans, the genetic code is DNA. But what is it in viruses? And here are your options. If you don't know what any of these mean, it's all right. We'll talk. give more detail on what these exactly mean in our next episode. So see you then, and I'm really happy you tuned in.